Do you want to make a fighting game? Probably not, right? It's not exactly easy. Even though on the surface it's just two characters throwing out a few dozen moves in front of a stage that would just be one of many locations in any other video game. The reality is that to even make a single character, you'd first need to go through the lengthy design process of creating the concept, the visuals, the frame data, hitboxes, voice acting, creating hundreds of frames of animation, and then you have to make the rest of the game. It's no wonder we get so few of these. However, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try or that there aren't ways of making things easier. There are even some games whose entire goal was to allow you to make whatever you want, to turn you into a developer. Today we want to highlight some of these games, but also shine a light on the wider range of tools or mechanics that try to give you the ability to create something of your own, to author your experience, at least in some way. If you end up enjoying the video and want to see more fighting game content, we would appreciate a like or a sub to the channel. Thank you. The earliest attempt to give players near complete control over the game happened surprisingly early, and even more surprisingly, it happened on consoles. Fighter Maker released in 1998 for PlayStation 1. If you were just playing it as any other fighting game, it's hard to call it anything more than a rather mediocre clone of Virtua Fighter, with a few Tekken characters thrown into the mix. No, the real selling point was the character creation. And we're not just talking about customizing their looks. With enough time and effort, you could create entirely new characters. You were limited by the general framework of the game, so you couldn't really create new mechanics, but everything else was fair game, from their movement to attacks and their properties. The only caveat is that making something actually decent would be extremely time-consuming, which is why most people only remember or learn about this game in the context of the wacky and goofy creations that incite more terror than any horror-themed fighting game. It would receive a sequel in 2002, and while it expanded the capabilities of the editor, it still had the same old issues of not being very fun to play and the editor being too complicated for anyone but the most bored or dedicated players. On the other hand, its 2D sister series, made by the same people that brought you RPG Maker, would be a lot more successful. This is just an outright fighting game engine, but it became extremely popular thanks to how easy it was to make your game, even if you had zero coding experience. Despite being long abandoned, people still utilize it to make new games, like the somewhat recent Angel of Battle. This is ultimately where most of the efforts went when it came to enabling people to make their own fighting games. The most famous example of this emerged in 1999, the legendary Mugen engine. Despite being a college project started by a couple of students, it ended up becoming a significant milestone in fighting game history. True to its name, it offered near endless flexibility to create whatever you wanted, while still keeping it relatively accessible. Salty Bet is a great testament to this. You can watch hours of CPU versus CPU matches between wildly different characters, many of whom represent entirely original mechanics or faithfully represent the games that they were ported from. The only thing you can do is sell your game, which is addressed by Ikemen, a community project that revived this long-abandoned engine and continues to improve it to this day. At one point, it also had a spiritual successor in Infinite Versus, a game that literally presented itself as a 3D Mugen, and made it possible to easily fight other people with your modded characters. Sadly, the cost of running this service was simply too much for its developer, so it was pretty short-lived. One of the latest attempts to give players all the tools they might need also includes Smack Studio, which launched a 1.0 version in the summer of last year. Though unlike the others, it focused specifically on the platform fighters, and out of everything we mentioned, it has perhaps the most user-friendly editing tools. All of these projects are incredibly ambitious, but it's also worth mentioning smaller-scale efforts to turn players into creators. Making a game is a lot, but creating your own character out of pre-made parts is a lot more manageable, and it's still quite fun. However, not that many games have historically attempted to give you this level of control. You might be surprised that the earliest example of this comes not from traditional fighting games, but rather from Fire Pro Wrestling. a fairly niche but very respected series among the fans of the genre. The third game in the series allowed you to pick out new moves for your wrestler, and it would take another 5 years until this would be done in a high-profile release with WWE Warzone. Since then, creating your character would become a staple of wrestling games. Yet the feature would elude traditional fighters until a little-known game from the year 2000. Among 2D fighting games, Kakuge Yaro offered unparalleled control over the moveset of your character. And this time, it was so simple that anyone could participate in creating their own Ultimate Warrior, evolving them after each fight to enhance existing strengths or cover up weaknesses. And purely as a fighting game, it feels better than you would expect from something so freeform. However, by far the most famous example of the character creation probably comes from Mortal Kombat Armageddon. For such a big release, you'd think this feature would be more reserved, but no. They gave you as much as they could possibly get away with granular, move-by-move creation process that allowed you to make some truly busted characters. And who knows if we would have gotten the variations in MKX and MK11 if not for this game. Only a couple of games have attempted something similar since MKA. Nintendo allowed you to pick and choose some moves for your Mii fighters. And more recent Street Fighter 6 did something similar by letting you combine general character style with a robust selection of special moves. However, the closest we got to complete freedom since was when Tekken played around with Combat in Tekken Tag Tournament 2, as well as Fight of Steel from 2022 where, funnily enough, you also create a custom robot fighter. It's also worth mentioning Rivals of Ether and Yomi Hustle while we're at it. By adding official support for Steam Workshop content, as well as comprehensive tools for people to make their own characters, these games have enabled hundreds and thousands of players to develop new characters. Some of them even went beyond being mods. It's just a shame that we only really see such recognition of user-made content from indie developers. With all that said, the spirit of player-made content shifted in an entirely different direction, as the way games are made has fundamentally changed. As fun as it would be to get something like Fighter Maker 3, developing such games just makes little sense in the current year. These days, if you want to make a fighting game, you can pick any major engine of your choice, and then utilize various fighting game templates and blueprints, alongside plenty of documentation and assets to help you along the way. Another major factor here is the rise of Roblox. If you're in your 30s or close to it, you're probably familiar with new developers making their start by modding Doom, Quake, Half-Life or Warcraft. Well, Roblox has become that but for younger generations. It's both a game platform and a game creation system that is surprisingly easy to use, and plenty of people have used it to make their first video game, with some also making their own fighting games. Tekken fans, for example, have probably seen this one already. It's a remarkable recreation of Tekken fundamentals, except it also has Drive Rush, an advanced training mode, and rollback netcode, while being developed by a single person. And that's just one of many talented people making their start on that platform. The tools to create whatever you want have become so advanced yet accessible, that the only thing that can hold you back is time and commitment. But if you have what it takes, this is a great time to go out there and create whatever you want, and as long as you pour your passion into it, that's all that matters. As always, thank you to those who watch our videos all the way to the end. Have a good one and see you next time.